How often do you read books? Those things with words and sentences in them? Once a day? Once a week? Once a month? Or once a year? If you want to read books but haven't been able to, this is the podcast for you. Here you will hear ardent book enthusiasts, voracious readers, and prolific authors talk about books with passion. If you have a suggestion for a book that you always wanted to know about before reading, please let us know. While piquing your curiosity is our job, picking the book that we talked about is your job. Enjoy!
Hello and welcome everyone to Books and Stuff podcast. In this podcast, we talk to authors who have written books and get their experiences, or we talk about a book we like and we summarize. I usually don't read the book, I'm not so good at reading these books, but I talk to people who like to read books, love reading books. They have books for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So these are the kind of people who I talk to and try to get smarter in the process. That's the whole idea of this podcast. Today, I'm very, very happy to introduce to you an author and an editor. So she's on two sides of this game of writing itself. So she is either writing or helping authors write better. I am very, very happy to introduce Dr. Pallavi Narayan. She has edited a book called Singapore at Home, Life Across Lines, and also authored Pamuk's Istanbul, The Self and the City. She has been writing fellow with Sing Lit Station Singapore, South Asia Speaks, CHCI, Mellon Global Humanities Institute on translation in Chile and migration in Taiwan, and KOC University Center for Asian Studies, Istanbul, and a publishing fellow with the Frankfurt Book Fair. I'm very, very happy to introduce you, Pallavi. Say hello to our listeners.
Hi, Bala. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here. It's a great pleasure to talk about my work, and it's my first podcast ever, so yay.
Yes. So, Pallavi, to just give you an idea, this is an informal podcast. And so we typically talk about books that either we have read somewhere and we talk about it with passion. In this case, and we are fortunate to have the author herself on this podcast. And that's what we're going to talk about. So, first of all, probably a tiny bit about you so that our listeners can know who they are listening to. Apart from me, I jibber jabber all the while in this podcast, but are we talking to?
Okay, so writing has been my passion and actually part of my life purpose, and I knew that ever since I was 5 years old. Only at that time, I didn't have any stories because I was too young. Of course, children make up stories all the time. But in terms of actually writing them out, I was at a loss. So, of course, I was reading and I read my first naughty book at the age of, I think, 5.5 or 6 on my own, and I was really proud of myself. I have worked with publishing houses as well as universities for almost the past 16 years now. I have worked in various roles like copy editing, commissioning, managing editors, and so on and so forth. I've also taught at universities. I have my doctorate in literature from IIT Delhi, and I have published 2 books, as you know, Bala has already told you all. So I have had the great fortune of being selected for 6 writing and publishing fellowships globally, and have just been awarded a new scholarship to participate in Fatima Bhutto's workshop, which will be held this weekend. So yeah, writing has been a big part of my life, or really thinking about writing, editing, trying to help authors edit. How did I really get into this? I was actually editor of my college newsletter and college magazine. I was really proud of holding that position. And ever since then, I thought I should learn about the book business before I actually start writing my own book. I don't know if that was the best solution to my problem of writing a book. Maybe not. I should have probably started writing when I was much younger or started publishing. But let's just say I wanted to work up my courage over the last several years. So I finally did. And in 2021, I have my Singapore anthology, and 2022, my Turkey book. So yeah, that's a little summary of who I am, what I've done. I've worked in Singapore and also India. And I've worked with Penguin Random House, Pan Macmillan, Routledge, NTU, NUS, SMU. I've worked with several authors individually as well and helped them with editing their work. And I'm proud to say that much of it has been published over the past several years. This morning also, I just finished copy editing somebody's novel. So hopefully that will be out by next year. Let's see.
Super, that's an amazing journey. People usually start just writing stuff and they just stumble through their way through writing without knowing what comes up next. That includes me. I'm speaking totally from personal experience. Then you stumble your way saying, okay, now that I'm done with my book, what do I do now? And then they start asking around. And then finally they get into, oh, this thing called editing. Have you heard of this? Then they start scrambling around for editors, and then I have no clue what to ask them or what to do. And then they get their book edited, and then somebody says, "Oh, you need a book proposal, and you need to go through this publishing process and all that." And that goes totally out of whack. Nobody has a clue. They think it's a never-ending spiral. But it's amazing how you started from the other end and you worked your way, and now you're a published author of two great books. That's unbelievable. Very, very inspiring. So, speaking of inspiration, Pallavi, who or what has been your inspiration? Because writing is a tough business, publishing is even a tougher business, and you've been associated, you are associated with authors, you're associated with publishing houses, both absolutely tough things to do. What is the inspiration for you to take this on first and then keep going into it?
Well, since I mentioned earlier that writing is part of my life purpose, it's just something I have to do. I have to publish because I feel I have a lot to contribute to the world. And in terms of my publishing experience as well as writing mentors, I have quite a few people I look up to or have looked up to, and people who have really helped me go from step to step. I think sometimes it wasn't even conscious on their part, but it's also sometimes teachers just appear in front of you. You don't really know that you are also being taught something, or they don't know that they're actually imparting some knowledge to you. So, in terms of my publishing colleagues, those I look up to, I would have to say Ms. Amita Goyal from Routledge, my former publishing director, has been a great inspiration and a great friend also throughout all these years. I worked with her from 2007 to 2011, and I learned the basics of copy editing from her. And in fact, her voice actually rings in my head every so often saying, you must do your references just that way. She has been a great inspiration. I would also like to name Mr. Barry Clark from Taylor and Francis Singapore, who has also been a great motivator throughout my last several in publishing as well as writing. And in fact, my book Pamuk's Istanbul has been published by Routledge as well. So it actually concludes this circle for me, which is really nice. I would also like to mention my publisher, Mr. Zafar Anjum of Kitab, who has been a friend ever since 2011. And in Singapore, he has been actually a great support as well, he and his entire family. And publishing my book with Kitab has also been coming full circle for me because I also have been fiction editor with Kitab's journal online since 2015. Those are my publishing inspirations in a way. So like to mention Mr. Daniel Watts of Pan Macmillan, now Tenzin Hudson, who was my managing director for about 2 years. And he actually referred me for the Frankfurt Fellowship. I just applied the first time and I actually got through. So most people in that fellowship had applied for 3 or 4 times already. So I was one of the very few people who had gotten at the very first time. So I must thank all my referees for that, of course. Mr. Peter Chopert of NUS Press as well, my former managing director in Singapore, has also been a great inspiration. I've learned a lot about publishing and university presses from him. And, that is knowledge that I actually carry inside me to this day. In terms of writers, there are many writers, in fact, who have actually inspired me. Oh, and I must mention from Penguin Random House also Millie Chiki Sarkar, both of whom I have worked with Millie quite closely actually. And just learning about the commercial side of publishing from them has been a really great aspect because working in scholarly publishing is quite different from working with trade publishing. considering that Millie heads the entire company now here, I think, having learned from her firsthand has been something that I really cherish. Yeah, but also in terms of writers, I think Singapore's provided a great platform for me. Mr. Eric Valles of the National Poetry Festival, he's the director, and he's also a wonderful friend to have. I mean, he's a great literary mentor to lots of young people. And having worked with him on various projects or presented at panel discussions over the last couple of years, it's just been surreal actually, because he's a person that I thought I couldn't approach when I first moved to Singapore 8-9 years ago. Now he's a friend and he's so nice and down to earth. Similarly, Mr. Felix Cheong, and also younger writers of my age group, that is in their mid to late 30s, Daryl Lim, Melissa Rani Selva, these have been great friends as well. Say Hao Guang. And there are several other writers in Singapore who have been comrades in arms, so to say. I'd also like to thank other writers of poetry, especially like Shilpa Dikshit Thaplyal. I mean, I'm just saying that we just create this kind of literary ecosystem. And I think that those communities are really helpful. Also, in terms of writing mentorships, I think South Asia Speaks has been continues to be this wonderful cohort, which is just expanding with every year. And we have met with so many writers, so many amazing high-class writers that one could not have ever dreamed of talking to face, in a sense. So, yeah, so those are some inspirations for me. I can rattle off a whole list, but I think it'll take up too much time.
No, I think what comes to mind is it takes a village to raise a child. That's what it totally tells me. Unbelievable list of inspiration from this. We'll definitely leave these names in the description of our podcast. I think it's valuable. And it also tells me that one, you're grateful to so many people, and that's commendable. On the other hand, you've also learned from each of them.
Yeah.
You've actually spent time and cultivated this, getting that idea one fine day and converting that into a book and just publishing it. It's not just three strokes and you're done. This is actually a long, arduous process. It takes time and it takes a lot of people, the combined effort of a lot of people for just one book to be released. So, which brings me, Pallavi, to your book. You take your pick. I know it's very difficult. It's like choosing between your children. Which one do I talk about? But I'll let you do the picking. And can you just summarize one of your books for us so that we get an idea of what is that book about?
Okay, I think I would like to summarize my short story collection, Singapore at Home, Life Across Lines, because I think most listeners of this podcast would actually connect well with those stories. A few stories are South Asia based. Most of the writers are actually a combination of people who have either been resident in Singapore during some period of their life, or they are also currently resident in Singapore. It's about stories from very many different perspectives of home, in terms of not just home as a physical space, but also what really constitutes home in this island state of Singapore, in this very cosmopolitan, outwardly very glittering facade of a city, which some people, oddly enough, think is just that, a facade. However, if you would bother to step into homes, if you would bother to meet people and actually talk to them, every city has its own story to narrate. And in fact, the kinds of narratives that have developed in this book talk about the core of what makes up Singapore's residents. So in terms of family relationships, friendly relationships, what really constitutes the family in Singapore? Because there are so many migrants, so many people from different parts of the world coming together to make Singapore their home. For example, I've also lived with friends, I've made homes with friends, I've lived alone, and I have made homes with my neighbors in a sense, created that sense of community. So for me, even within the pages of this book is a sense of home because I created my own community within these pages. So when I first moved to Singapore, I couldn't find that sense of community for myself. I felt that a number of the locals were actually pretty closed up or very guarded. And of course, it takes time to break into new circles and create new groups of friends and colleagues. But over time, I think over the course of my first year there, and of course, I also joined a lot of groups. I made a lot of effort on my part as well. And obviously, the literary world is the first place that I went to. So Singapore Writers Festival, which is also supported me and my book in the last couple of years was the first place that I went to in 2014. And over the course of the last 8 or 9 years, I feel that just these kinds of spaces have been so transformative. They have helped me engage with locals and expats alike, and also migrant workers who are a very important part of Singapore's literary landscape at this point in time. So to create this sense of community, I think Singlet Station also, the National Literary Platform, in a sense, has been a great support to writers in general. And throughout my fellowship earlier this year also, from which I'm working on my new anthology on food in Singapore, South Asian food to be precise. I think Singlet Station is also doing a very fine job of bringing together writers not only from Singapore but also from different parts of the world. So, some of the stories here, we are looking at stories which are not just constituted within home but also what are people carrying with them from their home countries to create that initial sense of home in a new place. How do they actually find their way around? How do they map these spaces for themselves to make themselves feel a sense of community and home? Yeah, and also the kinds of emotions that make the home the space that you want to be in. Do you really find that space welcoming? Or do you have flatmates or family or friends who don't make you feel good? I mean, in the sense of, is your heart breaking when you're entering that home space, or is your heart healing? So those are the kinds of questions that I was grappling with when I was writing the introduction to this book. And it's also divided into a few sections: neighbors and relatives, comfort and sustenance, precarity and tenacity, and home and away. So it's also not just about being at home, it's also what creates that sense of home when you're not at home, when you're actually flying out of Singapore. Are you fleeing Singapore, or are you going to return with fresh stories to share? That's a summary of the book. I hope you can connect with it.
Super. Are the stories independent of each other, like an anthology of different characters, or is this fictional? Is this based on real stories, real experiences that you've had? Give us a flavor of that.
So actually, the stories are written by 21 writers who submitted over the course of 4 or 5 months. We had created a video for them to submit, to encourage people to submit their stories. And oddly enough, this happened during the pandemic time. Now, this wasn't really based on the pandemic at all, but was actually the product of a couple of workshops that were held in Singapore at different locations in 2018 and 19. And there were about 25 to 50 participants in each workshop. These were not workshops that I had actually organized myself, but in talking to the writers, I felt that there was space for a book like this because no South Asian fiction yet has attempted in Singapore what we have done with our book here. In fact, creating a space for not only the South Asian community in Singapore, but generally for people from marginalized or peripheralized communities, people who don't consider themselves writers at all. I think it's been important for us to give a voice to them. This is a book of short stories. It's primarily fiction, but some of very few of the narratives are actually personalized and converted into short stories. And also, it's actually resulted in very interesting consequences in terms of writers coming back to us and saying, I never thought I could write. I've been writing in my journal all these years, but you actually published my story and you call me a writer. You give me that respect, you give me that dignity. And I think that's what is most crucial for me because having been on different sides of writing and publishing, I have also had my fair share of headaches and heartaches in writing. And I just feel that it's so important for people to feel that they can have a voice. In a very small way, in my own way, I've tried to do that.
Awesome. I think that's a great feeling to have for anybody to just thinks that writing is such a faraway, distant dream, but to make it realize for them, that must have been a real aha moment for many of them. That's awesome. Let's put you in the chair of Yoda, okay, our great Jedi master. If you were to go and tell any writer who's only journaling, let's say, and they've come to us, and particularly, I direct them to them saying, "Hey, why don't you talk to Pallavi? What would your tips of making them published authors, and what would that be?
Sure. I think the best way to go about it is to just try small, to start small, which is where all of us have started. Try publishing first in local journals or newspapers, which is where I'd started when my first poem was published when I was 12 in the Stan Times, children's newspaper section. So
Wow, I didn't know this at all. Awesome.
it was on friendship. And then I've had a few poems published there, and then the Indian Express had carried some articles, and then I used to do this book review section for Hindustan Times as well. For about a couple of years, off and on, I would submit book reviews and get paid that far back. So I'm really
Oh, wow. That's amazing. I wonder what you did with that money. Okay.
oh, just saved it in the bank for a rainy day. I was still
Uh,
studying, right? So it was very early.
Okay, budding authors, listen to that. If you get any money, put it in the bank. Don't spend it.
I am a great saver, so that's just me. But everyone can do what they wish to do. And of course, there are more avenues now, which there weren't when I was younger. And by younger, I also mean about, let's say, 15, 20 years ago. Even then, there was not as much avenues or pathways to publishing your work. Like, we didn't have any social media at that point in time. We didn't have Instagram, Facebook had just come into the picture. And of course, I think the best way for new writers is to actually look for literary journals on Submittable. It's this great online platform wherein you can find different journals to submit different genres of work to. And also, you can combine genres several times. So, like visual art and poetry, or creative nonfiction, or yeah, stuff like that. And I think most writers would also take something from their personal lives or personal experiences or thoughts, because after all, you are writing it yourself, right? So of course, something of you will go into that story. So even if it's not exactly directly from your life or your life experiences, there would be certain resonances with that. Yeah. But to go back to writing tips again, I think it's also great to be able to get mentored. Now, when I was 15, I was actually selected for this writing workshop with Keki Daruwala in Jaipur. And I was really thrilled because I was so young, and somebody as grand as Keki Daruwala had selected my work. However, my parents felt I was too young to travel alone and stay in Jaipur, so I did not happen to go. But I still hold that with great pride close to me. So if these days we have many writing workshops online. Students could definitely attend those. And in fact, all of us could. I still participate in several of them myself, because the craft of writing is like any other craft. If you're not practicing it enough, then it starts getting rusty. And to also practice different genres of writing, I think don't stick to just one kind of writing. Don't just stick to poetry or nonfiction or fiction. Keep moving around, keep seeing what's new. What are the changes you can make in your writing? What are the new influences you can have in your writing career, your writing life in general? Because after all, writing is as much personal as it is professional.
That really helps is write little, write a lot, but keep writing
Yeah.
and keep publishing. Small, big doesn't matter. That's my takeaway from this.
Yeah, some of the writers that I have given workshops to are people, let's just say people who want to write or want to become writers, but they feel that becoming a writer means getting paid immediately. It doesn't always happen that way. You have to write from the heart. You can't just write with the intent to make money out of it. And yes, it's great to crack good book deals or get paid for articles in magazines, but we all have to start somewhere. And sometimes life can also throw curveballs, and maybe if you've achieved something really great in the past, let's say you've had 5 or 6 dry years, you still need to start back somewhere. So don't stop yourself from writing just because you're not getting paid for it sometimes. Because new writers have asked me, but I want to contribute, but I won't get paid for this. Why are you doing it? And I just say, because it needs to be out. That's it. You need to be out there.
This is important that we do it for the love of it, but also to improve the craft. So both these need to go hand in hand. And if the time is right, if it hits the right audience, and things will happen from then
Right.
on.
Right.
Those things are not in your
Right.
control.
Exactly. Precisely.
That's what I got from yours. Excellent. That's amazing, Pallavi. Thanks a lot for that. Now, you mentioned social media being available so even blog platforms are available. They're all free. You just publish and that's it. Yeah. I mean, writing is pretty much frictionless, right? You just take a computer and start
Correct.
typing away, writing away. That's it. And there are viewerships and all that available on these platforms. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, even in social media, isn't there just too much going on? And isn't there something that, sometimes I feel that people use social, particularly writers, and I'm guilty of this also, is that when I'm on media like this, it's so addictive to be on it. And I know I have to be researching for my book. And I tell myself, yeah, that's what I'm doing. So when I spend a lot of time, I don't know if I've done my research or not. So, are there some things that you need to be careful about also in this?
How do you mean being careful about?
As in, see, like being on social media can be a time waster as well, and just for the sake of it. So, are there any other pitfalls that one needs to watch out in terms of in the writing journey itself and in the publishing journey itself?
Social media has its pros, of course, because you can find and discover and access so many more people, so many more platforms, so many writers and literary festivals and all kinds of, literary, you know, gigots, so to say. But definitely, I'm also guilty of procrastinating on social media, thinking, okay, maybe I'll just read one more blog post by this author for inspiration for my work. But I think there needs to be a point where you need to stop researching. You can't really keep researching all the time. So, what I've started doing, in fact, in the last few years, is that I jump straight into writing my draft. And I keep the books, journals, materials in terms of buzz or articles, and you need that for fiction, non-fiction as well. In fact, also for poetry, because if you think of T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, for example, that has a lot of references, historical, mythological, which obviously he needed to research on as well. So what I try to do is I try to keep maybe 4 or 5 tabs open or 4 or 5 books around me or that kind of thing so that I am immediately writing. And I try to time myself in that Pomodoro technique of writing of like 20 to 25 minutes of concentrated writing, and then I take 5 to 10 minutes break. Okay, I would also say that sometimes that break never seems to end, but but I think that's true of most writers. But I think a lot of my writing has been shaped by the way I did my doctorate along with full-time publishing jobs. Because I had limited time already with me, I would wake up at say 6 a.m. I would write for half an hour definitely, just concentratedly, and I would go to work, I would come back, start writing again around 8, 8:30, have dinner and go to bed. So maybe let's just say I would try to get at least 1 hour of good writing in a day on days when I had really deadlines and things like that looming in front of me. But also sometimes what I've done is I've taken 1 week off work. So that gives me 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 because you've got 2 weekends and 5 weekdays. So if you take 1 week off and tell yourself, all I'm going to do this week is to write that draft chapter. So if you just sit down and you just focus on that and you really try to clear all distractions, I think that has been where I have been most successful. If I remove all those distractions and just say, I'm just going to write 10,000 words this week, come what may. And it's worked because there's that threat of going back to work after that. So you have to finish that chapter within that week. If that works for anybody, then I'm really glad to share that tip.
Goal driven. Set yourself a goal, put yourself accountable for your own progress, and then move on to that. Amazing. So, this is a great tip for writers to definitely start. I picked out a couple of things that perhaps some people are not familiar with is the Pomodoro technique. I would highly recommend it to anybody. This is not only for writing, it can be for any job, any task that you have. Set yourself a timer for 25 minutes. Apparently, that's something that you can focus on completely during that time. And after it's done, take a 5 minute break, which is what Pallavi said. Sometimes you set a timer even for that and
Yeah.
stop it, and then you go back to another Pomodoro and get
Yeah,
on to
so
focused
ideally, if
work.
you do that for like 2 hours or so, you you can get about 500 to 1000 words written. I've seen that happen in front of me. So, also joining writers' groups of different kinds and different shades is also helpful, I think. Even if everybody is doing their own writing, everybody's in that focused energy together. And that really helps me, at least. So, if that helps anybody in this community, then that would be great as well.
That brings my attention to the fact that this is where I met Pallavi in a Pune writers group. We are part of the same community where we ran into each other, and when we exchanged notes, we realized that, oh wow, we have so many things in common, and things started from there. So, definitely being part of a community helps you in accountability. I mean, it's true for writing for sure. I can speak from experience as well. But for any other endeavor that you can take, if you're part of a community and you can make yourself accountable to the community, then good things start to happen. And with such a highly distracted world, that attention has become such a precious commodity, communities really help in pitch in wherever they can. So, again, a big shout out to Pune Writers Group for introducing such great people to me so that I can learn from them as well. Pallavi
Thank
is no
you so much.
exception in that regard.
That's very kind, Bala.
So, okay, one hypothetical question, and this is usually, after looking back, we've looked back at your journey, your publishing and editing journey. If you were to go back, let's say 8, 9 years, maybe even when you're 12 years old, when you published your first piece, what would you go tell your past self saying, hey, don't do this or do this more or do this less? What would that piece of advice to your past self be?
I would tell my past self that whatever situation I'm in, reading and writing have always helped me, so that I should never let go of these two elements who make up the core identity of who I am. That writing is always healing, and that reading not just great literature but also sometimes shoddy literature is also necessary. It's also necessary to read popular fiction. It's also necessary to read magazines. I remember once my grandmother said, oh, she should help out in the kitchen. And my mom said, no, she's reading right now. And my grandmother said, she's only reading some silly magazine. So surely she could help out now. But those silly magazines like Target, for example, or like 17 India also, even fashion magazines really shape the kind of person I have become. I mean, I am a person of diverse interests. So to go back to my younger self and tell my younger self that it's okay to have diverse interests, to not let people mollycoddle you or categorize you into just one kind of writing or one kind of reading or just categorize you in terms of your gender. That has been something that I've struggled with, that the kind of gender biases that have been there in not only in India but also all across Asia, and the kinds of societies that I've unfortunately also been exposed to at different times, to tell my younger self to not let anybody take away what makes me me in terms of what I like to read and what I like to write, and that regardless of any trauma or any difficulty or any challenge in my life, books will always be my savior.
Those are excellent closing words of our podcast. Books will always be our savior. Thanks a lot for your time, Pallavi. This is an excellent exchange. I learned so much from it. Hopefully, listeners also found it useful. Please do check out Pallavi's books, Singapore at Home, Life Across Lines, Pamuk's Istanbul, The Self and the City. You should check them out. If you're in Pune, you can get it signed by Pallavi herself. I meet her every Thursday. You can get it signed from there. So here's us. Those are available on Amazon. I will definitely make it a point to leave the books' names in the podcast
Thank you so much.
description, with the link and stuff. So we will do that for sure.
Great.
So thank you again, Pallavi, for your time
Thank you,
and
Bala.
for sharing valuable tips to our listeners. If you want to become a writer, we are talking to the perfect person for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was great being here.
If you liked the podcast and found it useful, please feel free to share the link via your favorite social media platform. To recommend an interesting book for our next discussion, please leave us a comment. See you next time.